Today, we are going to analyze a novel written by a great writer called John Ernst Steinbeck, and the novel is titled as The Winter of Our Discontent. John Ernst Steinbeck has contributed immensely to the world of American literature by authoring 27 books, which include a huge collection of 16 novels, 6 non-fiction books and 5 collection of short stories. He was born on February 27th, 1902 and died on December 20th, 1968. He won the Pulitzer Prize for The Grapes of Wrath, which was published in 1939, East of Eden in 1952 and the Novella of Mice and Men in 1937. Steinbeck was awarded with the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1962 for his realistic and imaginative writings, combining as they do sympathetic humor and keen social perception. Steinbeck's upbringing in California's Salinas Valley helped him to pick up regionalistic flavor, and he added this flavor very successfully to his writing. This was because the valley had a glorious history and a great cultural diversity, and this also enhanced the richness of the place and his writing. The valley was also a backdrop for many of his stories and is now popular as Steinbeck country. His first novel, Cup of Gold, narrates the adventures of pirate Henry Morgan, which had captured Steinbeck's imagination as a child. Steinbeck found a more authentic voice in his later novels by drawing upon direct memories of his life in California. Later, as a prolific writer, he used real events of American history which he experienced as a reporter in the first half of the 20th century. His later works were spread on the huge canvas of marine biology, politics, religion, history and mythology. One of his last published works was Travels with Charlie, a travelogue of a road trip he took in 1960 to rediscover America. Steinbeck's last novel, The Winter of Our Discontent, which was published in 1961, paints the moral decline in America. The protagonist, Ethan, grows dissatisfied with his falling moral quality and the immediate world around him. The book has a unique tone and is different from Steinbeck's amoral and ecological bearing in earlier works like Tortilla Flat and Cannery Row. The novel was appreciated but did not gain popularity of Grapes of Wrath. The Swedish Academy, while awarding the Nobel Prize, cited it most constructively that here he attained the same standard which he set in the Grapes of Wrath. Again, he holds his position as an independent expounder of the truth with an unbiased instinct for what is genuinely American, be it good or bad. That was a great compliment for the writer. The literary world was taken aback, and there was a huge outcry when he was awarded with the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1962. Steinbeck published no more fiction in the next 6 years before his death. This is a story of Ethan Allen Holly, a member of once great family that turned bankrupt. The story is woven around mainly Ethan Allen Holly, a former member of Long Island's aristocratic class. Ethan's late father has lost his family's fortune, and impact of the colossal loss on this family or Ethan's family is huge. Ethan now works as a clerk in a grocery store. His wife Mary and children find it difficult to accept and live according to their mediocre social and economic status and do not have any regard for the honesty and integrity that Ethan has and which he struggles to maintain to live in a fraudulent society. Good Friday proves to be a turning point in his life. It brings a kind of storm in his moral world. The people of the town, who are very close to him, question his simple and mediocre life. Many encourage him to make more money and raise the material standards of the living. These people, as well as his own children and other members of the town, all persuade him to restore the riches and glory of his family name. He strongly feels that he is blamed for being so unsuccessful when his name implies that he should taste success. The external factors and the psychological turmoil compels Ethan to stoop down to a lower level of life, and he neglects his normal standards of truthfulness in order to regain the standing and wealth that he once enjoyed. The immediate society of Ethan influences him to tread in a wrong path to gain wealth and power. His acquaintance, Margie, urges him to accept bribes. The bank manager, whose ancestors Ethan blames for his family's misfortunes, urges him to be more cruel and barbaric. Ethan's friend Joy, a bank teller, even gives Ethan a lesson on how to rob a bank and get away with the crime committed. After realizing that the current store owner, Italian immigrant, and his immigration was considered as illegal, Alfio Marullo who was an illegal immigrant, Ethan gives a secret tip to immigration. After Marullo is arrested, he reassigns the ownership of the store to Ethan through the actions of the very government agent that caught him. Marullo believes that Ethan is honest and reliable and would run the store based on values and ethics. But the moral decline of Ethan has already begun. He comes up with a plan for a bank robbery but fails to perform it because of external and hostile conditions. Finally, he manages to become influential in the town by taking control of a strip of land needed by local businessmen to build an airport. Ethan manages to buy land from Danny Taylor, the town drunkard and childhood friend, by a will made by Danny, and he slips it under the door of the store. The will was drawn without any kind of spoken and written agreement. Ethan, displaying his diplomatic side, gives money to Danny to receive treatment for his alcoholism. Danny tries to explain that Ethan's act of diplomacy would become futile because the drunks are liars and that he will just drink the money away. And that was proved right when Danny is found dead with empty bottles of whiskey and sleeping pills. Ethan gradually gains control over the clandestine dealings of the corrupt town businessmen and politicians. Ethan seems to accept what he has done, but is convinced that he will not become tarnished by it, or his image will not be tarnished by it. When he discovers that his son has adopted corrupt practices by winning a nationwide essay contest by plagiarizing classic American authors and orators, he feels that he is punished through his son's acts. A heated conversation follows with his son, in which his son denies any kind of guilt and defends himself, saying that the whole world indulges in it. Ethan realizes that his own moral decay is mirrored in his son's actions, and the guilt of Morello's expulsion and the death of Danny forces Ethan to become suicidal. It made him hollow. His daughter, instinctively understanding his intent, slips a family talisman into his pocket during a long embrace. When Ethan decides to commit the act, that is suicide, he searches his pocket to find razor blades and is surprised to find the talisman. As the tide comes into the bay in which he has drowned himself, he struggles to get out in order to return the talisman to his daughter. He realizes that the only hope in the future rests in his daughter, Mary Ellen, now the only sincere member of the Holly family. He returns home to pass the talisman off to her and confesses, else another light might go out. Now let's look at different characters which added spice and glamour to this wonderful novel, which talked about the moral decline of America. Sometimes a character comes along that rings out in your head. He's so identifiable that you almost assume that the character was modeled after your own soul. Never mind the fact that the character was created long back, maybe before you were born. He is you, or maybe you are him. These characters are so real that you forget that the author is the one narrating the story. The author is transparent. The narration is your heart, a characterization of yourself. The narration is raw and truthful. The prose may be nearly 50 years old, but it paints a portrait of American life that transcends all the days from this to that. Very important character of this novel is Ethan Allen Holly. He is a grocery clerk, doting husband and a father. Ethan decides to gain back his family's riches by turning over his boss to the immigration service, obtaining a large plot of land from his best friend and robbing a bank. Ethan is Steinbeck's creation, and the writer proudly states that Ethan is my character. I listen to his thoughts, to the ideas in his head, and I recognize them as the thoughts I so often find myself working through. His struggles, his emotions, and indeed his proposed solutions are a facsimile of the very ones I carry with me. Every man must consider his fate. In your heart, you find your answers, however right or wrong. Ethan found my answers. Not that I am going to start robbing banks or anything, but sitting in the place out of the wind, seeing under the guardian lights, I find the answers that Ethan found so long before I knew I was looking. No nonsense of Madison Avenue then, or trimming too many leaves from cauliflowers. What a beautiful description of the protagonist of the novel. Well, the second character is Mary Holly, who is Ethan's wife. She is patient and she is a gentlewoman that has kept the strings of the family together during crisis. Though she supports her husband, she pushes him to earn more money to maintain the decency of the family and status in the society. She thinks that Ethan can make more money than what he earns by being a grocery clerk. Another character is Joseph Patrick Murphy, the bank teller, who works in the bank next to Ethan's store. He is a good bookkeeper and a wonderful bank teller. Joy likes to flirt with women, but does not like lifetime commitment, or he doesn't like to get married to anyone. He is also a clever and a witty storyteller who has read and understood other people's lives. Another character is Alfio Marullo, the owner of the grocery store. Mr. Marlowe is an illegal immigrant from Italy. He came to America penniless and managed to make a small fortune after working his way up from a sandwich cart. Mr. Marlowe is a businessman who can glide quickly to the top to earn some extra money on each deal. Ethan sincerely takes care of the store by performing the monotonous acts like sweep the walk, stock the cans, and bag the purchases, which make the life boring. So, Ethan plans to get back on top and hatches a plan to carry out a bank robbery. But the untimely appearance of a government man proves to be a showstopper. At a second glance, though, the questions the policemen ask about Marlowe bring rise to an entirely better plan. He tips the immigration and gets Marlowe arrested. Marlowe transfers the authority of the ownership of the store to Ethan with the belief that he will manage it sincerely. Till the end, Marlowe does not realize that Ethan was responsible for his arrest. Another character is Mr. Baker, the owner of the bank who resides next to Ethan's store. Mr. Baker shows immense interest in the town's politics and growth. He is also a businessman who believes in earning a little more. He restores the glory of Holy family name since they were once the greatest families in New Baytown. Margie Young Hunt, another character, a young attractive woman who flirts with many of the men in town. She is divorced and lives off the invalidation. She is desperate for a male companion as her ex-husband is already on deathbed. This throws light on her selfish nature and who keeps herself busy by reading the fortunes of the women in town. She fails to realize that her own life is in complete mess. Alan Holly, another important character, is Ethan's teenage son who is obsessed with the idea of making a lot of money. Alan dreams of becoming a theatre personality who could win a fixed contest. He thinks that it is an easy channel to become rich and popular overnight. He has little interest in academics, focusing instead on finding the easy way out to earn money. As a result, he plagiarizes an essay that he submits to a national contest. Mary Ellen Holly is the young daughter of Ethan, who lives and loves to live in her fantasy world. She shares her father's interest, that is, she has a strong inclination towards learning the family's history and is also interested in academics. She is very close to her father, but also wishes that the family had more wealth and status in the society. Another character is Danny Taylor, who is Ethan's childhood friend and the best friend. Ethan and Danny, both of them, they come from well-to-do families. Danny owns a large plot of land where the town leaders want to build an airport. He does not want to sell the land because it is all that makes him worth anything to be people of New Baytown. Richard Walder, who is a federal agent who was sent to investigate Mr. Marlowe and responsible for expulsion of Mr. Marlowe. He returns to New Baytown to give Ethan the store after he is impressed by the account of Ethan's honesty. The first place is New Baytown. The story has a backdrop of a small town on the east coast modeled after Sag Harbor, New York, where Steinbeck resided while writing the book. New Baytown, like Sag Harbor, was once a whaling port. The town has fine inland waters and native timber of oak. The oak trees of the town used to supply the town with the timber necessary to build commercial ships. Eton reflects other towns not too far away grew and prospered on other products and energies, but New Baytown, whose whole living force had been in square-rigged ships and whales, sank into torpor. As coal oil replaced whale oil as the fuel source for the country, the town's economy failed to adapt. Other cities in the area embraced new methods by catering to the tourists that would flock to the area to escape the large cities of the East Coast, but New Baytown did not follow the suit. Another place is the tide pool. The tide pool that Eton visits during times of change and turmoil in his life is an important location in the novel. It's an ecological setting that is brimming with life. In Steinbeck's novels, the tide pools depict a microcosm of the society. Steinbeck is examining the paradox of the human species, in which man's urge for success, which is in the Darwinian world of the tide pool, is compared with a strong survival instinct. Inevitably override the weak survival quotient of his need to do good. In a nutshell, Eton's secret place is a place where animals struggle to survive through Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest, and it is here that Eton understands that to survive himself is must, and he must change and familiarize himself to the barbaric and heartless society around him. Then timeline is equally important, that is Holy Week and Independence Day. The entire story oscillates between two major holidays, Easter and 4th of July. These holidays can be interpreted as Eton's unholy transformation during Holy Week, and realizes that he is ensnared by his new life on Independence Day. Atlantic Monthly, Edward Weeks, announced The Winter of Our Discontent as a Steinbeck classic. His dialogue is full of life, the entrapment of Eton is ingenious, and the morality in his novel marks Mr. Steinbeck's return to the mood and the concern with which he wrote The Grapes of Wrath. Swedish Academy also gave its consent and awarded Steinbeck the Nobel Prize for Literature during 1962. The presentation speech by Secretary Anders Osterling highlighted the literary standards of 5 books, that is from the year 1935 to 1939, and continued thus. Steinbeck disproved their fears with The Winter of Our Discontent, a novel that was published in 1961. He maintained the same standards as he did in The Grapes of Wrath. He proudly occupies the position of independent expounder of the truth with an unprejudiced instinct for what is genuinely American, be it good or bad. In his communication to his friends before and after its publication, Steinbeck affirmed that he wrote the novel to address the moral decline of American culture during the 1950s and 60s. American criticism took a different turn after the Watergate scandal in 1970s. Eloy Garcia says, the book I then so impetuously criticized as somewhat thin now strikes me as a deeply penetrating study of the American tradition. I did not realize at that time that we had a condition, and he attributes this change of heart to our own enriched experience. During 1983, Carroll and Kasparek presented negative criticism of the character of Ethan for his doubtfulness and still called Steinbeck's treatment of American moral decay shallow, although supported the mythical elements of the story. At a conference celebrating the 100th anniversary of Steinbeck's birth, Stephen K. George declared, "With these authors, Bellow, Weeks and Gannett, I would contend that, given its multi-layered complexity, intriguing artistry and clear moral purpose, The Winter of Our Discontent ranks in the upper echelon of Steinbeck's fiction, alongside of Mice and Men, Cannery Row, East of Eden, and of course, The Grapes of Wrath." The novel was the last that Steinbeck completed before his death during 1968. The acts of King Arthur and his noble knights and the screenplay for Zapata were both published posthumously in unfinished forms. Many critics of The Winter of Our Discontent responded constructively to the novel, yet Steinbeck was troubled by its reception. The reviews of Winter have depressed me very much. They always do, even the favorable ones, but this time they have sunk me particularly. So this was quoted in Life and Letters 698. He was initially excited that he made his novel rich by incorporating so many influences like literary, biblical, historical, etc. And hardly any of the critics mentioned these elements. Instead, they focused on the plot and the obvious moral crisis of Ethan Hawley. Many reviews, such as William Hogan's in the San Francisco Chronicle, praised the novel as Steinbeck's most stimulating novel since The Grapes of Wrath. One of the most frequent complaints about the novel was Steinbeck's use of nicknames. In the New York Times Review, Orville Prescott complained, "When comedy is the prevailing note, moral outrage is a difficult emotion to sustain in the face of the hero's distracting habit of calling his wife by a whole series of pet names." William E. Wilson of the journal Providence saliently noted the book's tone. The bitter undertone of the novel is doubtly effective because it comes as an aftertaste. To conclude, this novel aims at highlighting the moral decline of American society, which also highlights the deterioration of the values and ethics of human race. I hope you have understood this valuable message that was given effectively by John Steinbeck to the society. Thank you.